Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New York Historical Society. I'm Louise Mirror, New York Historical's president and CEO. We are so very proud to collaborate with the Asia Society Museum as part of Asia Society's Triennial, and especially to feature in our Dexter Hall Gallery a very special show, Dreaming Together. The show's title is a riff on the Triennial's theme, We Do Not Dream Alone, and I want to congratulate Boon Director of the Asia Society Museum, and Ken Tan, Executive Director of Global Artistic Programs and Deputy Director of the Asia Society Museum, on their extraordinary work on the Triennial's behalf. I'm also thrilled to congratulate my own colleague, Wendy Ikemoto, our Curator of American Art and Curator of Dreaming Together. It has been an enormous pleasure for me to work alongside the Triennial team, especially because New York Historical Trustee and Exhibitions Committee Chair, Dr. Agnes Hsu-Tang, is the Triennial's Executive Director. It will be hard for me to keep to the brief time I've been given to introduce her as moderator of this program. Among much else, Dr. Hsu-Tang is an International Cultural Heritage Policy Advisor. Trained in art history and archaeology, she served on the UNESCO World Heritage Center's scientific committees, spoken at international conferences, authored important white papers on topics of critical global importance, and was advisor to the United States Cultural Property Advisory Committee on the renewal of the bilateral agreement with China to reduce the illicit trafficking of cultural objects. Prior to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, where she received her Ph.D., she was a special assistant to James R. Lilly, U.S. Ambassador to China and also to Korea. Dr. Hsu-Tang's accolades and awards are many, including our own New York Historical Medal of Merit for Public Engagement. The University of Pennsylvania Museum elected her as the museum's second Distinguished Consultative Scholar, and she was recently invited to serve on the board of the American Institute of Archaeology, the oldest professional organization in the field. Dr. Hsu-Tang is, above all, a person of extraordinary intellect, creativity, artistic and musical talent, courage, and moral rectitude. It has been the greatest good fortune for everyone at both of our institutions that she was the person charged with navigating the uncharted waters of the Triennial at this difficult time. Whatever challenges came her way, and there were very many for sure, she never once shied away. Her passion, her belief in the Triennial's mission, and her willingness to take on risk have been the key ingredients that brought this festival, the very first to open following Lockdown, as well as this program, to the brilliant fruition it deserves. I am honored to present to you Dr. Agnes Hsu-Tang. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening. And thank you, Louise, for the incredibly kind introduction. I am Agnes Hsu-Tang. I've had the honor to serve as the executive chair of the inaugural edition of the Asia Society Triennial, and as a proud trustee and chair of the Exhibitions Committee here at the New York Historical Society. It is my immense pleasure tonight to welcome all of you with my two friends here from the grand, beautiful Dexter Hall here at the New York Historical Society. Tonight's program marks a historic coming together of two iconic cultural institutions in New York City, the Asia Society Museum and the New York Historical Society, collaborating in creating and presenting an unprecedented exhibition aptly named Dreaming Together. This exhibition, opening today, kicks off a citywide 8 months long celebration, an art festival that celebrates contemporary art, ideas, and innovation, initiated by the artistic director of the Triennial, Boon, and organized by the Asia Society Museum. Boon has brought together over 40 artists from 21 countries. It is an exciting celebration that we invite all of you to join us in the next 8 months. With me here tonight are my two friends, Boon Tan, Artistic Director of the Asia Society Triennial and Director of the Asia Society Museum since 2015. Before joining us, he is a native of Singapore and served as the Assistant Chief Executive of Singapore's National Heritage Board. And prior to that, he was the Director of the National Art Museum in Singapore. Boon has had an illustrious career in contemporary art, curating, organizing, and directing 2 international biennales in Singapore and a multidisciplinary arts festival in France. Also joining me is Dr. Wendy Ikemoto, Curator of American Art here at the New York Historical Society. Wendy joined the Society in 2018 and since then has curated numerous exhibitions and responsible for the acquisitions of works of art in painting and sculpture and helped develop and teach in a new Masters of Arts program in Museum Studies here at the Society. Wendy is an academic and the author of several publications, including a forthcoming exhibition volume on John Keydor. She previously taught at the Vassar College and the Courtauld Institute. Thank you both for joining me this evening.
Thank you.
Wendy, we're going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about the history of the New York Historical Society, because this is one of the oldest art museums in America. In fact, the oldest museum in New York, founded in 1804. And this exhibition, your exhibition, has been described as game-changing, groundbreaking. What is so different about this exhibition?
Thank you, Agnes, for convening this conversation and for having me and Boon here. I think it's an excellent question. To me, it's important where we are sitting. We are sitting in Dexter Hall. This has long been a permanent American art gallery where we have showcased some of the most iconic paintings and sculptures of the history of the United States. And this exhibition is a way of breaking open that iconic image of American art, of American history, by placing it in dialogue with Asian and diasporic Asian art. So you might think of it as an interruption or an interrogation or something softer like an interweaving. But basically this collaboration is allowing us to question and reframe our American art collection, and in so doing to reflect upon the imagery and the art that typically are thought to define this place.
How did this idea come about? And this collaboration? I know Boon will talk a little bit more about the component, the triennial component, but how did you come together?
Well, I have to thank you, Agnes, for our collaboration. We're so grateful at New York Historical for your stewardship as a trustee, and particularly for your stewardship of our institutional goals toward diversity and inclusion. I think this exhibition is a prime example of that important work. And I personally am so appreciative that you were able given your leadership role also at the Asia Society and with the Asia Society Triennial, to connect our institutions and also to facilitate our curatorial conversations around the objects selected for this exhibition. So it was really an organic process, as I felt it to be, where we met with our various realms of expertise, knowledge of our collections, and worked together to create this interweaving.
But if I understand, you already had an idea that you had proposed to Louise even before we started talking about the Triennial.
Certainly, an Asian American art exhibition or trans-Pacific theme, an Asian and American subject, was always on my radar, but I hadn't made a specific proposal. So this is really, this collaboration is really what made it possible for me to pursue this idea at this moment.
It sounds like all the stars aligned.
Yes, all the stars aligned.
So Boon, let me turn to you. I have to start with a very simple question. Before you explain to us the Asia Society Triennial, please tell our viewers what exactly is a triennial or biennale or art festival? How is that different from, say, Art Basel? Can you just enlighten us?
Yeah, actually that's a not very simple question. But I think biennial or triennial, biennial or triennial is basically a recurrent exhibition or presentation of contemporary art that occurs, every 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, depending. But I think it was developed, especially in Europe and in Asia after 2000, as a way to capture and present to the public a broad kind of presentation of the most recent work that living artists were doing. And you must remember that it also came, the oldest biennial, of course the mother of biennials is the Venice Biennale in 1895. And in Asia, many of the biennials like Gwangju, whether it's Singapore or Jakarta, in Jakarta, for instance, emerged in the context of the sort of relatively underdeveloped museum or public art presentation infrastructure. So biennials took on the responsibility of reminding the public that art and artists, occur across the world and they are actively producing. And it's quite different from, let's say, a museum retrospective or survey, because biennials and triennials really are about what artists are doing now. Hence you see, even though we call it a visual art triennial, there is a lot of performance, there's frequently film and all sorts of forms in between, because it is about what artists are doing now. So if you were to wait a lot of times for the museum to catch up to this contemporary art production, it will no longer be contemporary, it would take some time, because this is very new art that does not have a clear art history yet, and the assessment still may change over time. And then the other distinctive feature about biennials and triennials, they frequently reflect the locality they are in. They frequently, in the model that you see in Europe and Asia, they frequently, even if it's organized by, let's say, a museum or an independent art center or a private foundation, it tends to use and partner with many partners across the city, including other museums and even public spaces, because one of the main motivations of contemporary art, one of the main interests that contemporary artists working now is, in a sense, also about the social context in which art is produced, the political issues, the economic issues that are prevalent in that locality. So a lot of times you find triennials and biennials always have some artists that try and respond to the local and communal memories of the place that it is in. So of course, Gwangju Biennale in Korea, Gwangju was the site of the Gwangju Massacre, which gave birth ultimately to the democratic South Korea that we see today. So as a matter of fact, the reason why I was so excited in this collaboration with Wendy is because, one, it is the New York Historical Society. I hope that the Triennial enables, the curators within the museum, like Wendy, an opportunity to, as Wendy says, disrupt and interrupt their normal narrative, in a sense to question how within that narrative, it's, for example, a narrative that may have excluded a lot of people and a lot of communities that are in the city, which the museum derives its rationale and its name from. So biennials give, by working with established institutions, also it gives a platform for the curators within the institution to also query their own sort of comfortable narrative, what has been there so far. And that really is, I think, a very important reason why biennials and triennials are so collaborative. You work with other institutions.
So following up on the context, the contemporary context of the city, of the history of New York Historical Society, I know you have 4 themes that you are addressing in your exhibition, Dreaming Together. And I just also want to add, I didn't mention earlier, that the overarching theme of the Asia Society Triennial is We Do Not Dream Alone. And here New York Historical Society is dreaming together with Asia Society on these 4 themes. Can you tell us and give us examples of the 4 themes that you are addressing?
Absolutely. The 4 themes that we chose are pressing global issues, what we understand to be pressing global issues. One is nature, or environmentalism. So here we are sitting in front of a prime example. One of the signature works from the collections of the New York Historical Society is 5-part monumental series of paintings by Thomas Cole called The Course of Empire, which across the 5 canvases charts this primal battle between nature and civilization. So civilization rises as nature is forced to recede, and civilization recedes while nature resurges and takes back over again. Our second theme is the city, the way that built environments encode broader issues like socioeconomic disparity, for example. And one of my favorite works in that section is a work from the 1990s by an artist named Mark Winott. It's a painting of a view from the Metro North 125th Street station, which features buildings that have since been demolished in the very aggressive urban renewal program centering around Harlem's historic 125th Street district. And that's set next to a painting from a photograph from just 1 year later from Beijing by an artist named Zhang Dali, which is also grappling with gentrification, with its impact, the impact of these aggressive urban renewal programs on everyday people. Our third section is people, or cultural identity. So one of the works I found most fascinating in that section is a portrait from 1899, the height of the Gilded Age, of a young woman from very wealthy means named Annie Tinker. And you see her in this portrait dressed in Orientalist fashion. So she is appropriating the fashion of another culture, and she's exploiting its perceived exoticism, its perceived otherness, specifically in order to defy Western gender norms. I mean, this was a woman who rebelled against the dictates of the Gilded Age. She was a suffragist. She was LGBTQ. She founded a home to support retired professional women. So she broke a lot of boundaries, and it's interesting that to do so, she used the fashion of another culture as part of that strategy. And then our fourth section is about protest and the right to protest. And one of my favorite works from that section is actually from your collection. It is a photograph of a performance by Wang Jin, in which the artist painted the railroad ties of a new rail line between Beijing and Kowloon red in order to protest the then impending handover of Hong Kong back to the communist regime. So you have this very vibrant red paint that is symbolic of the communist regime and also evocative of blood, of violence, of bloodshed, especially in the splatters of red that catches on the gravel between the rail ties. And that, I think one reason I select that work to mention is that it's so resonant with the pro-democracy protests happening right now in Hong Kong, which itself is connected in interesting ways to protests in the United States, to Black Lives Matter.
I want to return to that point momentarily, but I first want to pick up what you just said, Orientalism.
Yes.
And I'm going to turn to Boon Hui. I know that Boon Hui Edward Said has been a hero of yours for a very long time. Well, in fact, he's a hero of all of us. And I know that Orientalism was the foundational inspiration of this inaugural edition of the Triennial. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think I was very interested in what, I think all of us are very interested in what Said had to say about how, not in terms of, less in terms of, direct political action or military action, but how, in terms of the production of knowledge, of terms, of how we describe, another culture, or reduce, cultures to culture, reduce difference to homogeneity, that sort of alters or rewires almost, I think, how we look at the world, how we look at us versus the other. And I was very interested. There was a lecture he did, and it's available on YouTube, when he was criticizing Fukuyama's book about the end of history, and he made the incredible point that in all communities, in all cultures, there is always a mainstream or orthodox culture that tends to look for a kind of golden past that frequently never existed, but that cultural development, it actually occurs, cultural change actually occurs on the fringes and the interstices of this mainstream orthodox culture, what we call counterculture, what we call protest culture, what we call fringe culture, and they're frequently associated with, for us, the intellectuals, the artists, the minorities, of any form. That actually he was trying to say that actually development, social and cultural development, a lot of the new things that drive a society forward culturally actually cannot come from the mainstream orthodox culture, because that culture is about freezing things, keeping it in stasis, because this is our golden age. Let's not leave our golden age, So that set me thinking about, the role of the other, how, especially in recent times, with Black Lives Matter, the anti-Asian sort of attacks following COVID, really, it's the latest chapter in a long history of this kind of working out of culture, of how societies deal with the minorities of whatever, LGBTQ, racial minorities, religious minorities, that are in a kind of very paradoxical situation, that they are scapegoated sometimes by mainstream culture, but at the same time, they are the ones that are generating this development, this ferment, and of course he speaks a lot about how intellectuals belong in this sort of category, because intellectuals are questioning that status quo. And I think it's very interesting to see what's happening in the world and the US and New York now, which is why, again, coming back to why I'm so delighted with this collaboration, because I think what Wendy has done is also not just to say that we are partners or collaborators historically with the lands or the peoples we call Asia and Asians, but also to say that, hello, the Asia is here. Those that we racial or xenophobic people will say that the barbarians outside the city gates. We're saying, I think Wendy's show is saying the barbarians are inside the gate with you, and they have always been with you. You've sat down, you've eaten with them. You know, I think that's very important. And personally, as a person coming from Singapore, which is an immigrant nation, you know, alongside an indigenous Southeast Asian Malay population, the Chinese, the Indians came because of colonialism. And I'm always reminded, in fact, just now when I was looking at the Martin Wong that Wendy has, I was suddenly reminded of a simple fact, how in Singapore we celebrate street food, but our street food is a hybrid food. And how did it come about? It's because when the immigrants, the laborers came for work, they would sit along the roadside, the Muslim, the Hindu, the Christian, you know, the Buddhist and Taoist, and they would eat. And that's how the food cuisine start to hybridize. You know, that is it's not a political process. It's a natural historical process, and it reflects a condition of the world for a long time. You know, this thing about diasporic communities, immigrant communities, and that all cultures are diverse, all nations are diverse. You know, even Japan has the Ainu, which even after so long, they are still in that process of trying to sort of accommodate and assimilate that as part of their identity. So I think that is a kind of thing that art, and I think this exhibition, Dreaming Together, does that, because what is a nation but a group? Again, we go back to Tocqueville. You know, that a nation, and we go back to Benedict Anderson. What is a nation? A nation is a group of people who may never see each other or speak to each other in their entire lifetimes. They may share very little in common, religion, wealth, whatever, very little in common, but they believe in this abstract thing, this thing about coming together. There is a kind of dream that they share, and they have to believe that they share, and that is the nation. So I think that is you know, something that's very at the core of this triennial, and why we were so excited to work on this project with Wendy.
Returning to and following up on significant cultural changes in our lifetime, you've included in this exhibition 3 works created during Black Lives Matter, essentially truly contemporary within the last 6 months, as well as a magnificent work by the African-American artist Betty Saar. I think this has to be the first time in American art history that the works of Martin Wong or Zhang Dali are shown with works by Thomas Cole and Betty Saar. Tell us more about that.
We're thrilled to have it as part of our collection. And actually, the way I've placed it is as a pivot point between a painting of the American Revolution and the 3 Black Lives Matter protest works. The painting of the American Revolution is from the mid-19th century, but it's of an event that happened on July 9th, 1776, when colonists in New York joined with continental troops. They listened to a public reading of the freshly written Declaration of Independence. They became caught up in this swell of patriotism. They all marched down to Bowling Green, where the British government had installed a monumental gilded lead equestrian statue of King George III. And in a scene highly resonant with events today, they tore down that statue. And what's interesting is that Johann Ortel, the painter, he supported the Union. Remember, he's painting in the mid-19th century. He was embedded for a while with General Burnside. He was ordained. He founded one of the first African-American schools in North Carolina. He offered services to freed African Americans, baptisms, marriages, etc. And he includes in this scene about the fight for liberty a Black man who is essentially lying on the ground in the path of the statue's fall. He also includes an indigenous family, which is being pushed literally to the margins of the picture. And so this is somebody who is pointing to the hypocrisy of this fight for liberty and exposing that this is a fight for a selective type of liberty. So Sar's work is meant to pick up on that Black figure in the Ortel painting. We are looking at an assemblage that features a grossly caricatured figure of a mammy who is placed on a washboard in this place of very hard labor for African American women. The caricature itself comes from the Jim Crow era. And what Betty Saar does is she arms this caricature with an assault rifle. And so a figure that was originally meant to denigrate African American women and keep them in a place of servitude now has the agency to fight for her own liberation. And so I think what's, so much of Saar's work is about the persistence of the past. That the nation has abolished slavery. And yet on this mammy figure's skirt, her apron, are what look like abstract Black lines. They're actually the bodies of slaves packed into the cargo hold of a slave ship. So still, that image, which Saar says is imprinted on her, on all of us, is part of her DNA. It's on this figure, this Jim Crow era figure is carrying that memory of slavery forward, and she's carrying it into the present times. You can think of, the work is called Extreme Times Call for Extreme Heroines. You can think of Saar herself as this extreme heroine. So she's conflating and collapsing all of these different time periods. And so her work, I feel, helps to draw the history of the Revolutionary era, of slavery, into the Jim Crow era, into the present day, and then turn to the 3 Black Lives Matter works, one of which is a work by a Singaporean artist that speaks to the global scope of this movement. That is a work called Yellow Peril Supports Black Power, and it features these very lithe, muscular bodies of a yellow tiger and a black panther walking side by side, eyes ablaze, tails intertwined. And it's a visualization of this phrase that was actually used in the 1960s as part of the civil rights movement. And this is the first work, as the artist describes it, his first activist work. He was really galvanized by the murder of George Floyd to start moving his work into a different sort of sphere. And so I'm very grateful to one of my colleagues, Rebecca Klassen, who heads our History Response initiative to collect around events happening now, like Black Lives Matter. And I'm very grateful that we were able to sort of tie all of these movements together.
Thank you, Wendy. I want to, I'm still absorbing all you just said. I want to revisit 2 other traumatic events in American history, which are represented by 2 works from the Asia Society collection, both by Dinkyul Lei.
Yes.
I know that you had previously wanted Historical Society to include the helicopter video.
Yes.
Tell us about Dinkyul Lei's work.
I think in the American art scene, with the contemporary art, that's very interesting, and I believe it will become more important over time. A group of artists of Vietnamese descent who are the Viet Kieu, and they are basically the group of people who came or whose families arrived in the US because of the Vietnam War, with the surrender of the American war effort, the end of the American war effort, and then also, the people that were repatriated out, but also the subsequent boat people. And Ding Qiulei came to this country as a child, as a refugee, basically, and grew up American. I mean, they were educated here, and he's completely schooled in art production in the American kind of style. But they have, after what we call the sort of opening up in Vietnam after Doi Moi in the 80s, some of them returned back to bring their new skills to establish art centers and networks in Vietnam. So they really are moving between two worlds, from the land of their birth and of course the land that they grew up in, America, which is basically the one that they know most, spent most of their conscious life in, because they came as a child. So that's why Ding Qiulei's work also, he has a lot of work that references actual historical events in the Vietnamese, in the what the Vietnamese call the war against America, the American War. And my favorite work is actually South China Sea Pishkun, which is a video of a whole group of American helicopters crashing into the South China Sea. And the genesis of the work, of course, came from an actual historical incident, on when basically Saigon fell on 30th of April, I think 1975. And as the Americans and some of the Vietnamese were flown out of the falling city, to the aircraft carriers on the South China Sea. There were so many people and so many planes, they couldn't all fit on the aircraft carrier. So as more and more people came, the American military, the Navy, they actually pushed all the airplanes that had already landed and the people had disembarked onto the sea, and later some of them were actually even deliberately crashed into the ocean, ostensibly so that the enemy would not gain access to American military equipment. But it is, in the video, it is such a poignant reminder of this very cataclysmic moment, that signaled also a kind of end of American military imperialism in Asia, But the interesting and the very emotional thing for me was that at the same time, it also gave birth to this community in the US, this American community, this community of Americans in the US out of this really traumatic kind of incident. And when I was going through the show, I felt very moved that it was, seeing that next to the Black Lives Movement works, to the Bet Ye Sa, to the painting of the statue of King George III being put down, because I think there is this sense of, we are in a kind of moment where things will never be the same again. And the second thing is, of course, that just like with the African American citizens, it's very strange what's going on historically, because they, at a very fundamental level, never had a choice about coming to America. History, they were brought here as a result of history, just like the Vietnamese, many members of the Vietnamese community. History, they were the children of history, of which the American nation played a great part in. So then it puts the current sort of, racist attacks and xenophobia in a I think it gives it a very emotional edge, I think.
And I'm going to turn to Wendy to describe the monumental double scrolls by Ding Qiulei.
So there are some artworks in my experience that almost stymie verbalization. And to me, these are strong candidates. When we installed these works, I was actually surprised by them because I had seen them only in photographs of the installation at the Asia Society. These are long photographic scrolls Ours are almost 100 feet long. And what they depict are the media images of the World Trade Center towers during the attacks of 9/11, stretched to this great length. And that stretching really energizes the images. What I gathered from the artist's gallery is that the works are meant to be shown installed in different ways. So hence at the Asia Society you had slightly lower ceilings, and you showed a different portion of the scrolls, and here we have slightly higher ceilings, we show a different portion of the scrolls. When I saw your installation shots, I thought these looked really like lyrical cascades of color. They were very elegant, very soothing almost. And when we installed them here, to me, they come across as traumatic. You have these images that are abstracted into streaks of color, but that color is so evocative. You have the burning orange and the steel gray of the buildings, which you can still make out in the sections that we show, and the blue sky of that clear day, and the blackness, the ash black. And so one of the scrolls that we show on the right, it's almost entirely black. And one of my colleagues was saying, to him, the image that you always see representing the World Trade Center towers is the explosions, right? The buildings with the flames coming out of them. But in his memory, it's that ash falling and falling on the city that really is the image he remembers, the experience he remembers of the event. And so these are, to me, they're very difficult works. And I think that, sometimes these images, quote unquote iconic images or prolific images that are repeated over and over again, that come to represent a specific event, they are repeated so much that maybe they lose a bit of their emotional impact. And I think that by abstracting these images and stretching them and making, imbuing them with that tension, the artist reactivates their emotional power, their impact, the sense of trauma and terror in that moment. And of course, in the way that he essentially resurrects the towers in the form of these tall hanging scrolls, and the way that the scrolls cascade at the bottom to evoke their collapse. It's like they're suspended in this constant state of fall. And so again, I feel like these works, they're so impactful to the extent that they almost can't be verbalized. But that's my impression. It's just a very visceral reaction that they elicited in me, at least.
And I think it goes to this question of why a historical museum would want to embrace contemporary art. Because what Wendy has just described so eloquently is also that not just contemporary art, but particularly biennials or triennials, have now evolved to be a way in which these very difficult, very grayish issues that are swirling around us today can be thought through. It's a way of seeing the issue, a way of thinking through the issue. And I think it gives, within the context of a historical museum, art, but especially I think modern and contemporary art, gives it a certain kind of emotional intensity that forces you almost, to not be complacent. And I think just by looking at that, when you go back and look at some of the historical paintings in this show, you have been changed. Your eyes and your emotions are slightly different. You're not going to go back to a 19th century painting and immediately just go, this is a really beautiful painting. It is, but I think your lens has changed by that exposure to the contemporary art that what Wendy was describing with the Tinkulé work.
I know we're running out of time. I want to end our conversation today on a note of hope and human resilience. Is there work in this exhibition that embodies hope?
I would select the video animation by the Japanese artist collective Team Lab. It's called Life Survives by the Power of Life from your collection. And, you know, when we installed that work, I was standing with my colleagues in front of the animation, and we were all just standing there in silence, I think mesmerized by the work. This is an artist collective, as I understand it, that often produces very interactive digital works that involve full digital environments and human and digital interface interactions. This is a little bit different, as it is contained in one screen, and yet somehow it still has that immersive pull. It's a silent animation. It begins with the calligraphic character of life, which starts to turn in space and become a branch, which then moves through time, and it withers and it blooms and it withers again and blooms again. And this was a work that the artists conceived of in the wake of the 2011 tsunami and nuclear disaster in Fukushima, Japan. And so to be able to produce a work like this, following a tragedy like that, I think it does offer hope. I think that it almost performs its depiction that out of loss and out of despair, in a metaphorical winter, out of that will come hope and renewal and a figurative spring. So it's a work that I think is very meditative, and I think that part of that meditation becomes on renewal and on hope.
Thank you, Wendy. Boon Hui, you have the final word as the artistic director of this epic Herculean odyssey.
Well, I think the work that I was really struck by was actually a work from the Historical Society collection. It's the Ken Lam illustration of the Asian tiger, and because to me it's a work really, it's very direct, and he's an illustrator by training. You know, he's not like a painter or illustrator by training. So they are used to saying what they want to say with the economy of means, and very direct. So I think this idea of, you know, what he did, you know, in a sense, the Asian who is scapegoat with, you know, the African American who is also scapegoat, but the two, you know, together, this sense of solidarity between, you know, I think disadvantaged or marginalized communities, I think it really is of the moment, you know. But it also talks about solidarity between the oppressed, you know, and I'm reminded, we did a program yesterday with you know, around dance and called Hacking the Syllabus, around dance and basically Black Lives Matter, you know, how we can recover from these kind of racial attitudes. And they quoted a poet at the end, which I thought was amazing. And the line was, "We are the heroes we have been waiting for." And because it just struck me, they were just trying to say, you know, like what we are trying to do in the Triennial and this exhibition, Dreaming Together in New York Historical Society, in the end, nobody is going to come and save you. You know, there may be benefactors or champions, but in the end, people have to say themselves. People have to come and dream together and imagine another kind of reality. So I love that work, and the works, the three works that you have, Wendy has selected, that come from the BLM, because I think they show a kind of, you know, people power in its very pure sense. You know, it's not even politics in the sense of politics or political parties, but in the sense that we need to do something, and we need to do it together.
How beautifully said.
Which, can I just add something?
Please.
Which I think is absolutely beautifully said, and an extremely crucial point. But it's also not to say that this sort of solidarity and dialogue is always easy. And I think that that one takeaway from this exhibition, from the Triennial as a whole, for me, I would hope, would be the work of dialogue. That, you know, if we are going to, you know, step into this new reality, this nebulous golden space, as in the Ken Lam illustration, we need civic dialogue with all of its pitfalls, with all of its struggles. It's necessary. We need to move beyond factionalism, beyond tribalism, beyond insularity, and do the work of imagining, of dreaming collaboratively together about a more just local and international society.
And you both lead by example, charging with this incredible partnership. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us this evening. And all three of us look forward to welcoming all of you here at the New York Historical Society and at the Asia Society Museum, as well as other venues for collateral exhibitions, films, and other exciting programs during the next 8 months. I will conclude with some information about the exhibition details. Here at the New York Historical Society, on Friday morning from 10 to 11 a.m., the museum is open for members, those who are above the age of 65 and immunocompromised. And from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m., it is open to the public. And the museum is also open on Saturday and Sunday from 11 to 5 p.m. At the Asia Society Museum, the Triennial officially kicks off on Tuesday, October 27th. The first installment concludes on February 7th. Exhibition opening hours during the opening week are 11 to 6 p.m. the first week, and regular museum hours after that will be Thursdays to Sundays from 11 to 5 p.m. And on Thursdays from 11 to noon, that hour is especially reserved for those who are age 65 and above and immunocompromised. And I should mention that there is a second installment of the Triennial that will begin in March and will conclude in late June. All tickets are available online. We invite you to check out the websites and book your timed ticket due to safety protocols online. Thank you so much, and we look forward to welcoming you.